Okay, we're live, guys. My name is Jamie Owen. I am one of the attorneys here at Student Legal Services. I'm joined today by Camilo from the Legal Aid Society of the Orange County Bar Association and Patricia Delahan from our office. I'm going to do a little housekeeping up front, then we'll do some introductions, and then we'll kind of get into today's topic, which is leases. So we'll be covering things about leases in the time of COVID-19, as well as some things that you guys could be thinking about as your lease might be coming to an end, or you might be thinking about signing a new lease, and kind of going from there. So this is the first in a series of presentations that we are going to be doing in collaboration with the Legal Aid Society. Next week, a week from today, again at noon, we will be doing another presentation on scams. And then that following Tuesday, the 9th, again at noon, we'll be talking about injunctions for intimate partner and other domestic violence situations. And we hope that you guys join us. If you have questions during today's presentation, the best way to do that will be to comment on the YouTube video, and we'll be monitoring those and try to get to as many as we possibly can. And what else did I have? I don't know if I had anything else. Camilo, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Camilo Parra. I'm the newest housing attorney at the Legal Aid Society of the Orange County Bar Association. Our mission at the Legal Aid Society is to provide quality legal services for the low-income residents, the working poor, children, and disadvantaged groups with special legal needs in Orange County, Florida.
And Patricia, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Patricia Delahan. I'm an attorney with the Office of Student Legal Services, and I provide legal assistance to students in civil matters, and that can be things from evictions, name changes, consumer issues, bankruptcies, pretty much anything that's civil. If you have questions, if we don't handle it, we'll make sure to point you in the right direction.
And again, my name is Jamie Owen. I am one of the attorneys at Student Legal Services as well. I handle all of our outreach and coordinate all of this. And like Patricia said, we provide free legal services for students in a variety of areas. In the description box below this video, there is the contact information for both our office and the Legal Aid Society. So if you're a student and you need some assistance, you can reach out to us at the contact below. And then if you are a resident of Orange County and may qualify for their services, you can contact the Legal Aid Society. Okay, so leases. I think probably the hot topic is June 2nd. The moratorium on evictions will be ending. Camilo, if you want to talk a little bit about that and kind of what the thought of what might happen for someone who may have been relying on the moratorium and where that's going to kind of go from here.
Sure. So there's a few moratoriums at play. I guess we'll talk about the most local one to Orange County. Currently, until June 2nd, we have from our own Chief Judge, Donald J. Myers, an order that is basically putting on pause any eviction or foreclosure actions with the Orange County Clerk and Osceola County Clerk of Courts until June 2nd. What that really means is just they're all on pause. Come June 3rd, we don't really know what's actually going to happen. The only thing we can assume is that we're going to go back to business as usual in terms of having to deliver some hard news to a lot of people, especially in these troubled times. We haven't heard anything that would lead us to expect an extension, so I wouldn't be counting on it either. Just expect June 3rd. If an eviction has been filed or if an eviction is filed thereafter, the courts are going to start to process it.
And I don't know if we've heard anything from complexes about what they intend to do with rent. Patricia, you want to talk a little bit about that?
So in the past, during the moratorium, landlords seem to be pretty willing to work with tenants. As long as the tenants reach out to them, I see them asking for proof of loss of wages. So proof that the tenant applied for unemployment compensation, what their wages were before they lost their jobs. But if they can provide some sort of proof, the practice has been that they are working with the students. Now, I'm not sure if that's going to change once the moratorium ends. So they'll be interesting to see. Also, some of these agreements, I'm not sure if they were in writing or more like a verbal agreement. So hopefully, they will continue to work with the students. And what we have seen was maybe like a decrease in rent. They were not paying as much until they got their jobs back. With the understanding, I would assume that those arrears will still be due at some point.
I know a few of the communities that serve our students, mostly in student housing, seem to have some formalized programs for some relief. So if you're in that situation, you've been hearing about that, we hope you've applied. We hope you applied for CARES relief. Unfortunately, we're past the point where you can apply for that now. But I do think we've seen from some of the area complexes that I don't know if it's a bluff or not, but that they do intend to resume issuing 3-day notices to pay, which is the first step in an eviction action after June 2nd.
We're aware of a good deal of apartment complexes, really landlords in general, but including apartment complexes that have throughout the moratorium have been issuing these 3-day notices. There have been evictions filed as of, I think the last we checked was last week. There was over 80 evictions filed in Orange County since the moratorium began. Obviously, nothing's happening with those. They're just kind of sitting there. But bottom line is we've seen everything from business as usual in terms of how apartment complexes are handling these cases to some more extreme scenarios where they're going to the self-help evictions, they're shutting off utilities, they're acting in bad ways to try and get people to pay or get out. But I'd also like to talk a little bit about the good thing. We've seen just as many landlords and apartment complexes showing compassion, showing patience, understanding, working out payment plans with individuals, sending notices that acknowledge the circumstances, acknowledge kind of what we're going through as a nation, as a planet. But bottom line is communicate with your landlord, get on the same page with them, let them know what your circumstances are. We're kind of all in this together. And I think that's really the best way to look at what's going on right now is that we're not going to get through it without each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely recommend that the first step, if you haven't already, and we hope you already have, but it's to talk to your landlord and see if there's any flexibility there, to see, if they will work with you. But if they won't, there might be some resources that are available to you. Patricia, you want to talk about the resources on campus that we know of?
Well, there's UCF Cares.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm not sure what additional funding they have available. There was the funding from the federal government, but they had to apply by the 19th. Like it says, that's no longer available. So hopefully most students who were in financial need did apply. I guess we're discussing earlier today that you can contact 211, the phone number, and they may put you in touch with some charities, like Catholic charities. I don't know what the funding that they have that's available. I would assume that your main motive is to prevent eviction. So at some point, I think you'd have to show that if you receive this aid, that would prevent eviction, that somehow, that would you'd be able to pay the 3-day notice, and then you'd be able to continue making payments of rent in the future. But I would assume that's probably a lot of people are applying for the same pot of money. So. Mm-hmm.
Camilo, are you aware of any other resources out in the community that might be available to Orange County residents?
There's a lot of opportunities out there for people, and they should definitely be out there looking. The one place that I don't think I have done a single consult without recommending would be United Way. call 211. They offer all sorts of services. They really, what they do is they direct you to a service that could help you in your situation. They also have a website. What I would recommend though is before you reach out to them, figure out what it is that you actually need. I noticed that a lot of people reach out to them and just kind of lay everything on the plate on them, and then they don't even know where to direct you. They don't know, are you looking for rental assistance, or are you looking for a new place to stay? What is it you need? And if you're just looking for, if they come to the conclusion that you're just coming to them looking for rental assistance for money, it's probably all gone, like was mentioned. So let them know that maybe what you're actually looking for is a new place to stay, because you know you're not going to be able to stay in this property any longer. So really just figure out what it is that you actually need before you reach out to these guys, because they're overloaded right now, and they need to know how to help you efficiently.
Yeah, I remember when I used to do a lot of work with 211, and UCF Cares here on campus does some work, and would know better than we do is that a lot of times they have a set amount of money starting on the first of the month, and it goes pretty quickly. So by the end of the month, there's not a whole lot, but we are coming up on June 1st. So if you do need some assistance, whether it's utility assistance, so let's say you can pay your rent, but like you're not going to be able to keep the electric bill on, and often that's a reason why you could lose housing, because you're usually required to keep electricity on, or some other reason that you contact them sooner rather than later, you're more likely to be able to get some assistance. But let's say the person, we have a student or an individual who tried cares, or they got it and they've exhausted it and they aren't able to get any more assistance and are really in a position where they're not going to be able to pay rent coming forward, and now the eviction moratorium is up. What do we recommend for people who are in that situation?
Well, you want to avoid the eviction. So if you get like a 3-day notice to pay or vacate, if you vacate, then you avoid the eviction, and you avoid the extra cost of the eviction, the filing fee, the attorney's fees, and the eviction being on your record. So a lot of our students, I mean, they do hopefully have a place to go to, a family member they can go to. So in that situation, you're kind of looking at minimizing your damages. So it would be like if you really can't afford to pay within the 3 days, and the best thing would be, just surrender possession, make sure you get a receipt for the keys, make sure you return everything to the landlord, access to the mailbox, to the gym, return everything that belongs to the landlord, get a receipt showing that the landlord received this from you, remove all your personal belongings, and leave the place as clean as you possibly can, and document the condition of your room. If let's say you're renting a room and a bathroom with other people, document the condition of your room and your bathroom. So hopefully you'll not be charged for any damages. So we'll want to document the condition when you move out.
Yeah, one of the ways I like to recommend students do that is via video. So what used to happen is we get a bunch of pictures and it was all white walls and I didn't know what I was looking at. So video is a really good way to kind of walk around, make sure you're very thorough. All four corners of the room, all the walls, in the closet, in cabinets. If it's a whole apartment, make sure you get the appliances. I used to see pictures of like immaculate kitchens, like you'd think you could eat off the floor. And then inevitably the landlord would say that the microwave was, in atrocious shape and charged for cleaning that. So if you're going to be moving out anywhere at any time, we really recommend that you take that extra step to document the condition, because it can really help you if the landlord decides to try to charge you with cleaning fees or other damages.
Yeah, make sure like you constantly look at document the interior, the appliances of the oven, the fridge, the microwave. Open the cabinets, make sure there's nothing left behind. Sometimes you see situations where students leave cleaning supplies behind, thinking that's helpful, and they get charged for it. So don't leave anything behind. document the condition of the bathtub, the sink, the toilet, everything, because sometimes they'll charge you to clean the bathtub and they'll charge you to clean the floors. So it's just, and look at your lease. I mean, see what the lease requires you to do before you move out. I mean, what are you required to do?
And I think the reason why we recommend these things is because an eviction on your record, rightful or wrongful, even just having been filed, not going to a judgment of eviction, can really impact your ability to be able to rent in the future. So even let's say you win because your landlord filed a wrongful eviction. Sometimes landlords in the future won't really look at that. They'll just be like, oh, eviction on the record, and you need to either pay a really high security deposit, or maybe if it's a really nice complex, they're not going to allow you to move in at all. And then that eviction is there. It's court record, it's public record, and it could be on your record for a very long time. Obviously over time, the less that it matters if it happened 25 years ago and you have a really impeccable rental history or credit history and income situation. But for the next few years, it could be really devastating. If you have an eviction. And the thing to think about eviction is that it's for possession of the property. So it's something that the landlord has to do in order to get possession of the property. It does not necessarily have to do with rental monies owed. So that can be a separate step afterwards. So let's say landlord says that I owe April and May, I move out, turn in the keys to avoid eviction. That doesn't necessarily mean that the landlord will not be pursuing me for April and May. Just typically the practice has been that they will not, if it's an apartment complex, a lot of times they will not bring a court action. They'll put it in collections, and they wouldn't, even if there is a court action, it wouldn't be for eviction to physically remove you for the property. It would just be for monies owed. We talked a little bit about so if someone has some debt from, let's say they moved out to avoid eviction and they owed a couple months of rent and they owe that to the landlord. Can you talk a little bit, Patricia, about what typically would happen at that point?
It's typically sent to collections, and then you'll receive a letter from a collection agency. Sometimes you get a call, and then typically within 5 days after you get the call, they should send you a letter basically saying who they're collecting for, who's the creditor, how much do you owe, and that if you dispute it, you have 30 days to dispute the debt. So at that point, I mean, you can dispute it, you have 30 days, you can request verification, you can try to work some sort of a payment plan with the collection agency to avoid this going on your credit report.
And I don't know, Camilo, if you've had the same experience, but for us, a lot of times what we found is that in collections, if you have a landlord who's not willing to work with you at this time, that we find that sometimes the collection agency is a lot more willing to take a fraction of what you owe and maybe make a settlement. And if that's something that you're interested in doing and you're still a student at UCF when that happens, we can definitely help you with those negotiations. Or if you have another debt that you're trying to resolve, we can walk you through what your possible options are to kind of get that going. So
That's certainly true. And I think it rings true to what a lot of times people overlook, the importance of staying in communication. Before we even get to that point, you should always be communicating with your landlord. Make sure you're on the same page. Let them know what your concerns are, what's keeping you from making your payments, why you don't want to get evicted. Figure out if there's any payment plan available just to avoid the debt collection getting involved in the first place. But you're right, once you get to that point, the same thing rings true. Communicate with them. If you get that letter from them, don't hide from it. It's not going to go away. reach out to them. They will work with you if you at least try. And maybe the working with you means, okay, pay up so we don't send this to your credit. But if you don't communicate, you're not going to know what's going to happen. Maybe dispute it. If you can think of, if the number's wrong, if you can think of reasons why you should be able to dispute this, dispute it. Interact with them, seek counsel, look for an attorney, reach out to legal aid or to student legal services, anyone out there to, try and defend you.
Mm-hmm. And so we have some students who, because of everything that's going on, and even though we think that at least in some way we're going to be welcoming students back for fall, but may not have signed a lease for the 2021 school year yet, or maybe already have, and they're kind of not sure if they're going to be returning to the Orlando area. And Patricia, do you want to talk a little bit about what we recommend for those students?
So if you're not sure whether you're going to be returning or whether you can afford the rent, then you shouldn't sign it. Yeah. Because once you sign it, you have agreed, it's a contract, it's a binding contract. Yeah. And if you agree to pay $1,000 per month for 12 months, it's a contract for $12,000. And then if it happens that you decide to take all your classes online, or that you cannot afford, then it's still your responsibility until either the landlord finds a new tenant or you find a new tenant. And even under those circumstances, it can still cost you money, because a lot of the leases will say there's a $250 reletting fee. I've seen as high as 85% of the monthly rent as the reletting fees. So it's still going to cost you money. So if you don't know, if you're not sure that you intend to attend classes here in person, and that you can't afford it, then you shouldn't do it. Maybe you can commute from home. Some of our students don't live that far away that they may be able to commute even like twice a week or something like that.
Yeah, that's for our students that haven't signed yet. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now, if you have signed and you definitely know that you're not coming for whatever reason, then, one, you should try to find somebody to take over your lease. So it's early enough, you may be able to do that. And the other thing is to notify the landlord as soon as possible so they can put your unit back on the market. Believe it or not, a lot of units are like sold out already or close to being sold out. So you may be lucky and get somebody to take over your lease.
Yeah. And in years past, that has been the case, I'd say, for the last 4 or 5 years, that it has been relatively easy when you have, when you've signed a place and you have a whole year to find someone to take over your lease. Now, we're in a whole new territory now. So we're not really sure what fall is going to look like, but the sooner you list it and the sooner you try to find someone, the sooner you communicate with your landlord. That might be something that you need to do the better, because I have heard of some students that are thinking about taking transient classes or only online classes for the fall because of the uncertainty at this point, and won't be living here in Orlando. So that's something you need to think about. On the other hand, if you return in, you decide to come back in October, or you decide to return in spring, it might be harder to find housing, but there usually always is some sort of housing available. There's an office on campus called Student Neighborhood Relations that can help people find housing. And also, if you're looking for someone to take over your lease, they have a place on their website where you can list it. So that's always an idea too. It's just something I wanted to mention. Anybody else have any comments about the pandemic, the moratorium ending, things that students or other Orange County residents should be thinking about?
I don't think we mentioned yet, like the federal moratorium. Then some properties may be covered under the federal moratorium, the CARES Act. In that case, the moratorium, I believe, doesn't expire until July 25th. And then they have to give you a 30-day notice to pay or vacate versus a 3-day notice. Camilo, do you have like any links as to where somebody can check which properties are covered by the CARES Act?
There's a lot of them. There's at least, ultimately, there's like dozens out there. I
Right.
have about 9 or so that I've been relying on to try and figure out which properties may be covered. These databases are not perfect.
Right.
They're as extensive as they can be. One of the greatest flaws with the CARES Act is that without the cooperation of the property owner, and in some cases prior property owners, it's very difficult to know for sure whether a property is actually federally backed, therefore actually covered. These databases do help, though. I have run into a few situations, I wish more, but a few, where I found a client's property on the database and was able to give them the good news, screenshot this page, hold on to it. There's also a website that's norent.org that is offering basically a self-help tool where you go on there, you kind of answer some questions, and it spits out a personalized letter and email. It's free of charge that is sent to your landlord, notifying them of what your rights are under the CARES Act if you're covered. So yeah, there's some resources available, but they're not simple. They're kind of a little frustrating. You have to troubleshoot a lot. So for example, let's say you're using one of these databases to figure out if the apartment you're renting is actually covered. You can't just search your apartment address. You need to search your apartment address. You need to search the address of the apartment complex. You need to search the address of the clubhouse. You need to search the address of the leasing office. You need to get pretty extensive. And also you need to try every variation of abbreviation of, so like the difference between DR and drive, LN and lane. You have to troubleshoot all of these different search terms to make sure that you've actually, covered all your bases. And even then, it's very difficult to know for sure if your property is or isn't covered, like I said before, without the cooperation of the property owner, which can be difficult.
Have you used the site Florida evictionprotection.org?
That is actually one of the sites. Yeah, there's many that you can use. I would recommend using all of them though, and for every situation, because you can't really know where there's going to be an overlap or where there's going to be an imperfection. It's amazing that these databases exist. I'm sure it took a tremendous amount of effort, but they're not perfect, and you can't expect them to be.
And so just so I can clarify for people who might be listening, covered properties that we're talking about, the CARES Act, are properties that have some sort of federal funding or some sort of federally backed mortgage.
Exactly.
Correct, Camilo? Camilo would know better than I do to be affected by the federal law in the CARES Act. And that's some properties, but not all properties. I do know that some of the properties around campus do have like some low income tax credit
It all counts.
units, so that would count. But it's really hard for you just to, let's say it's just a regular property, but they have a Fannie or Freddie mortgage, which is a federally backed mortgage. It's kind of hard to find out whether they have that without a lot of digging into the background. So if you're not sure, contact one of our organizations. We'll try to help you figure it out. But it buys you another 30 days or so to kind of figure out what you're doing from there, and then gives you an additional notice period before the eviction can happen.
If your property is covered under the CARES Act, you might be the only person I'm having a happy consultation with. And even then, the most important thing to remember about this whole situation, no matter what type of protection you're looking for, or whether there's a moratorium going on or there isn't a moratorium going on, a contract is a contract. Your obligation to pay remains intact. That's why one thing I recommend everyone do, if you have a written lease, look at it, read it, you signed it. It's a series of promises between you and your landlord that you are going to be held liable for, and so should they. Things to look out for specifically: non-renewal notice requirements. Some of them say Nothing to the sort. They won't even mention a notice of non-renewal. If that's the case, you can know that on the end of that contract, so, and I'm talking specifically in the case where it's a written contract and it's for a lease, so, it starts this day, ends this day. If your contract is silent as to there being a notice requirement, you can assume that at the last day of your contract, if you're not out, you're in violation. You were supposed to be out by that day, and you need to be able to show that you received permission to be there afterwards. And at that point, if there's not a new written lease, you're probably a month-to-month tenant if you're continuing to pay month to month. And in that case, the notice requirement is a little different. It could be whatever they want to be if it is in writing. But let's say they just say, we're going to extend this for another month, but we're not having you sign anything else. They then only have to give you 15 days of notice from the end of that month to let you know they're not renewing.
Mhm.
So just be aware of this. Look for a notice of non-renewal and know that if it's not in there, that's not great either. That means that once it's over, and there's no obligation under Florida law for a landlord to renew a lease. There's no obligation whatsoever. Um, Another thing to look out for in your leases that you may have for the people who are really worried about how to get out of it is look for anything that mentions either early lease termination, what the process might look like, or liquidated damages. If you see those words, liquidated damages, that'll give you an idea of what it's going to cost you to get out of this contract. Keep in mind, you can always speak to your landlord or the property owner or your management company, the apartment complex. You can always try to work with them. You can, negotiate things. Contracts can be modified, but read your contract, know what you're being held to and what they're going to be held to.
Yep. And if you don't know what you're reading, at least for our students, we do lease reviews. So if you have a lease and it's 42 pages long, like the one I was looking at earlier today, I don't expect you to know what everything in that means. And sometimes it might seem contradictory, what some things say in it. And that's what we're here for. We review them. You just give us a call, shoot us an email. We'll set you up, and we're happy to do that. But if you're not a student, I'm not sure what the Legal Aid Society does, but read it carefully. Kind of go through it. The leasing agent often doesn't really understand what's in their own lease, has been my experience. So you really need to spend some time going through it and making sure you understand, because that lease, what's in there is binding, not any sort of oral representation that might have been made. A lot of times, in fact, most leases will say this is the entire agreement. If it totally disclaims any oral representations and basically says that if you're going to modify it, there needs to be another signed writing by both parties. So that's kind of where you're at with that. So nobody's asked any questions yet. So if you do have questions, make sure you type them in. I can see them, or at least I think I'm seeing them, and let us know. But otherwise, I think we're going to transition out a little bit of COVID-19 and pandemic to think about where our students are at the moment. So a lot of our students will be having their leases come to an end. A lot of the leases that are offered by student apartment complexes end at the end of July. So one of the things that Camilo was talking about a little bit earlier are notice periods, and you do see those in student apartment complex leases. The max can be 60 days. So you will maybe be coming up on that soon. And if you do not intend to renew, you probably need to let your landlord know in writing. Now, they are supposed to let you know that that period is coming up, but you really need to know it yourself and not rely on them, because you might end up in a situation like we've seen many times where the landlord says that they gave you notice, proper notice of the period, the notice period coming up, and the potential consequences if you don't give proper notice. and you'll maybe never have gotten it because maybe they posted it on your door and someone come by and ripped it off, or the wind blew it away, or who knows. Maybe they never really gave it, but they said they did. So the best thing to do is to know it and make sure that you abide by that, because you might get charged some extra monies if you don't. Do you have anything to add on that, Patricia?
Um, yeah, like the other coin of what Camille was talking about is like what happens to our students is that they don't give the 60-day notice and they just vacate thinking everything is good. And then they get a notice from the landlord saying they owe an additional month's rent because they didn't give the 60-day notice and the lease became a month to month. So that's kind of a common problem that we see. Um, Not so much student housing. If you rent by the room, they typically want you out once the lease is up because I guess they need to clean it up for new people coming in. But if you rented the entire apartment or you rented the entire house, those notice of non-renewals have become very common.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so you need to watch out for those.
Yeah, we don't see those in student housing as much because any of you guys who are in student housing probably know that they start trying to find out if you're going to renew for the following August through July and November of the year before. So typically they kind of manage that pretty well and know who's going to renew and who isn't, um, because of honestly how fast they fill up. But we do see it for those of you who are renting apartments that are not student apartment complexes, or houses with private landlords or property management companies, that those notice periods are coming, especially if your lease ends July 31st. We're coming up on 60 days. So take a glance at your
Yeah.
lease.
So if you missed, like, let's say you have to give a 60-day notice and you missed it, you may want to talk to your landlord, see if, like, you can give a 60-day notice and stay maybe a couple of weeks more, not the entire month. Or you may decide, well, I'm already paying for an additional month. I might as well stay the additional month and then give like a 15-day notice to terminate the month-to-month tenancy. That's what they call it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have those kinds of issues, if you have any questions, just give us a call back and we'll be happy to look at it and discuss your options with you.
One thing I'd like to add, just because it's come up recently,
Mm-hmm.
look at the language of the non-renew or of the notice of to renew or not renew. If there is that requirement in your contract, make sure you look at it and see not just how many days notice you're required to give, what type of notice? Because some places demand writing, which makes sense, but some places need that writing to go to a specific person or to a specific address. Some places require a very specific form with very specific forms of completion. Like you have to put the right information in there. Like you have to tell them exactly the day you plan on leaving, or it's not going to be upheld or not going to be considered effective notice. I'm not saying that I agree with any of those ridiculous requirements. Be aware of them. Look for them.
Yeah, and a lot of times the landlord has their own form. So if you just go to the leasing office, you can fill out their form and just make sure you either take a picture of it, make sure it's dated, get a copy if they'll give you a copy, something that shows that you did give timely notice, just in case there's any dispute. Now, this doesn't come up very often, but it does happen. We want to make sure that no one gets caught up in that. I think landlords right now are also feeling the pinch. So, because people haven't been able to pay rent, so they might have some incentive to try to get some extra monies out of you. And we want to make sure you protect yourself from that. And also, all the same stuff that we talked about if you were moving out because you wanted to avoid eviction with documenting the property still applies if it's the end of the lease. So you want to make sure you leave the premises clean. If was a requirement to get professional carpet cleaning, that you do that and get your receipts, that you take your video or your pictures and you document it. Because landlords, at least from our experience at UCF, for a lot of our students, do like to charge students for cleaning and holes in walls, carpet stains, all sorts of stuff. And if you don't document the condition of how you've left it, then it's he said, she said, and it's really hard.
Blinds.
Yeah, blinds, yes. Broken blinds, those are notorious.
Blind replacement.
Yes, and that could be not super expensive in some cases and very expensive in other cases.
And if it's furnished, then you want to take pictures and
yeah.
document the condition of the furniture as well, the mattress, desk.
Yeah, there was one place, I won't mention names, but last fall that was very notorious for charging students very high amounts of money for stained couches and carpet replacement, which would have only been for the bedroom because that was the only place with carpet. It was very high. So we really, really recommend that you guys take good pictures when you move out to protect yourself as best as you can.
And when you move in, because
Oh yeah,
definitely if it's, if you're within the time to do it when you first move in, that's the best form of documentation and throughout. And if you run into problems, don't hide from them. Talk to your property manager, whoever it is that you have to deal with for the, the premises. Let them know what's going on so they can fix it, so they can, let you know what to expect from it ahead of time.
And that's another reason to look at your lease when you move in. And maybe we'll transition now from damages to lease for next time, what to look for in your lease. But one of the things that I just saw is like if you don't report it within 72 hours and move in, it's like you own it. Basically, was what the lease said. So the video at move-in is great, but also if they require a move-in walkthrough sheet, do that. Be very thorough. Mark everything down, even things that seem minor, and keep a copy of that before you turn it in, because sometimes they tend to go missing by the end of your lease. So that's for students who are moving out. Damages, if they charge you, they'll let you know, usually in a letter to the last known address. And if you get one of those, you can come in, if you're a student, come into our office and we'll help you. If you're a low-income resident, you could contact the Legal Aid Society. And I think you guys try to find some pro bono attorneys to help people that are in that case with that. But I wanted to touch on before we wrap up here is that what if someone's looking for a lease? What should some things that before they sign it, they should be thinking about? And we know it's probably a little late for a lot of our students. They've already signed a lease, but I still know that some of you are indeed looking for leases for the fall. So Patricia, if you want to kind of touch on the types of student housing and things to think about.
Well, there's student housing where you rent by the room, so you're responsible for your room and your bathroom if you have your own bathroom, and then you're jointly responsible for the common areas. And then there's leases where you lease the entire apartment by yourself with other roommates, or you rent the house by yourself with other roommates. Things to look for. One is like, are you required to give a notice of non-renewal? I mean, you need to know that. So if you want to leave when the lease expires and not be responsible for any additional rent, you have to make sure you comply with that notice of non-renewal. If it's 60 days, that's required. If you're going to mail it, you should mail it 65 days ahead of time. You should send it by certified mail return receipt requested, so you have proof that they received your notice that you were not intending to renew your lease. If you go to the leasing office and you sign the form, make sure you keep a copy of the form for your records, or like Jamie said, take a picture. The other things would be, what are you, if you need to pay security deposit, what are you required to get your security deposit back? I mean, what are you required to do? Give a forwarding address. What are you required to pay for professional cleaning, for professional carpet cleaning? Sometimes when you rent a house and you rent They may charge you for a minimum charge for professional cleaning of $250, a minimum charge for carpet cleaning of $150. So those are things that may be negotiable if you know they're there, or at least, you can take that into account in deciding whether or not you want to rent this specific unit. If you know there's mandatory cleaning fees, that's the cost to you of renting this place. So we see that quite often where students feel that they left the place impeccable and they're still being charged these fees, and it's kind of pretty difficult to deal with because that's what's in the lease. So what are you going to do? The other thing would be, are we required to do a move-in inspection? A lot of leases require you to do move-in inspection, and to, complete the move-in inspection, saying what's wrong with the place. And sometimes they'll give you as little as 24 hours, sometimes 48 hours. So you need to be as thorough in your inspection. I mean, just because something does not bother you does not mean you should not note it, because if you don't note it, it's going to be presumed that you caused the problem. So again, it's just like completing those move-in inspections. Even if you're not required to do one, it's a good idea to do one and to let the landlord know of anything that's wrong with the place, so you won't be held liable for that. The other thing would be like fees. I mean, sometimes landlords have pet penalties. So if you have a pet visiting, for example, they may have a penalty of $200, even if the pet does not live there. So you want to know you have those kind of fines, because if you do, you don't want your boyfriend or girlfriend to bring their little pet dog in or puppy or whatever, because if it doesn't cause any damages, you can then get a letter from the landlord saying, oh, you owe us $400. I've seen one as high as $400. So just look for, the kinds of fines that are there. Sometimes you see like charges if they have to give you a notice of eviction, they'll charge you for a notice of eviction. So just look for those kinds of things. Let's see what else. Okay.
Maintenance.
Maintenance, yeah, it's a big one. Yeah. Especially when it comes to a house. I mean, who's responsible for the yard, pest control. So a lot of times, especially for houses, it may be like they may have a clause there saying you're responsible for the first $200 of damages. So you want to know that, because that all involves, what's the total cost to you of the rental. Also, if you're renting and it's an HOA community, you probably want to look at the HOA rules, because if you violate those rules, you may be, you may get a notice from the landlord that you are in violation of the lease, and you now owe for whatever fines the HOA imposed. And sometimes HOAs have limits on the number of unrelated people living together. So there's been an issue that we see students getting into, is that they rent and there's 4 of them and there can only be 3. So then later on they can get notice that, that they have to vacate. And of course it's a big pain, like in the middle of a semester having to do this.
And that's not just the HOA that says that. I've seen as little as 2 unrelated persons that can live together from an HOA. But if you're renting in the city of Oviedo, in city limits, it is 3 unrelated persons can live together in a single family home. And it's very strongly enforced in the city of Oviedo. And it'll be like a code violation, and it just gets you in a lot of headaches. So keep that in mind. Yeah. That's usually what gives you away, is that there's a lot of cars and a lot of young people at a house. And that's kind of what you'll be at. In Orange County, it's 4 unrelated persons can live together. We don't see it as enforced as much, but you should still keep it in mind and make sure that you're not getting yourself in a situation where you could have some issues later on. I don't know, Camilo, if you can think of anything you see in leases to add to that people should be keeping an eye out for.
A lot of it's a recap. I certainly agree with the non-renewal notice requirements. Be aware of it. Early lease termination or liquidated damages, so if you can't pay or if an emergency comes up. If you need to get out of this lease, you need to know what the exit process is like. If there is nothing about it in your lease, know that means it's a murky area and it could be pretty ugly. You could be held liable for the entirety of the lease term. Hopefully not. Hopefully they'd find someone else to take it up, and then they'd be offsetting damages, but don't rely on that. Anything, ideally, if you can get your lease in a electronic format and you can say do like a control find or one of those things where you can look for specific terms, I would say look up any $sign, look up anything that affects money, look up the word damages, look up the word liability, look up yeah, I mean, you want to be aware of what fees you're paying from the beginning to the end. Like for example, I was I had to read through a contract or a lease agreement, what it really was, not that long ago, where the way the fees were outlined, it was so unclear if there was actually a security deposit involved, and they used so many different terms for the different kinds of fees. An individual kind of led themselves to believe that they had paid a security deposit, and they kind of got it in their head that it was a certain amount of money. They found themselves expecting and relying on this money in the future, which in the first place is never a good idea. You can never rely on getting your security deposit back. You never know what's going to actually happen. Secondly, in her case, it wasn't even a security deposit. If you actually read carefully what all those fees were, it was just a bunch of, I would call them junk fees, but maybe some of them are actually fair administrative fees that are not refundable and are not a security deposit. And unfortunately for that lady, the reason she got stuck with what I considered to be just a lease from the abyss is because she had an eviction action in her record. And so this was the best deal she could get. So it's just another reminder that an eviction action should be avoided at all costs because it limits not only your ability to find housing in the future, but you might get stuck with a lot of really bad deals.
Yeah, and one other thing I was thinking of is renter's insurance. So some landlords require renter's insurance, and we actually highly recommend it. There's two main types of renter's insurance. The kind that protects your landlord if you do something. So a couple years ago, I had some gentleman that caused a kitchen fire or allegedly caused a kitchen fire. And fortunately, they had renter's insurance and they took care of that. Several years ago, I had that situation and they did not have renter's insurance and they were being sued in excess of $15,000 for damages. So it's a good idea to have that renter's insurance. And then the second kind protects your belongings. So if there's a hurricane or a pipe burst or something of that nature, usually your landlord's not responsible for your belongings. So it's good to have renter's insurance to do that. And it's usually, I'm not going to say affordable, but relatively low cost, because what affordable is to different people varies. A lot of times your auto insurance company will offer it, and for the whole year it's like $200. So it's a good idea to have, and some apartment complexes require you to have it. So there's still no questions, so if anybody has anything else, we'll kind of wrap up, and then if there's any questions that comes in, I'll let you guys know. Patricia, you have anything?
Like Camilo said, I mean, read the lease, try to understand it. I mean, if a word search works, that would be wonderful, but like look things for fees, look at the security deposit. What do they say you require to do to get your security deposit back? Sometimes we see certain leases that tell you how much they're going to charge you for things. Like, if we need to replace a door, is this much? If we need to do the carpet cleaning, is this much? So, you may decide that it's maybe cheaper if you did cause some damage for you to take care of that yourself. Look for fines. Know if there's fines for pets. Know what your late fees are, if there's fines for late fees. The notice of non-renewal is a big one. Liquidated damages, usually that means that if you need to terminate the lease, you pay X amount of money, and then the landlords have to, once you pay that, you're not responsible for any other rent. Usually it's 2 months rent, so it's probably not going to be very affordable for a lot of people. No maintenance. What are you responsible for? Are you responsible for the yard? Are you responsible for pest control? I mean, you have to take all that into account to determine whether the affordability issue. Know who, if you're gonna rent with somebody else, I mean, know who you're renting with. And And even if you don't pay security deposit, a big thing. I mean, sometimes leases say, well, you have to pay security deposit as, you know, some sort of an incentive. Realize that you're still responsible for damages. So if there's no security deposit there, and you cause damages, they just cannot. There's no security deposit charged against, but they're still gonna come after you. And the security deposit thing, once you get that notice, you have like 15 days to respond. So if you're in that situation, you're always welcome to come and see us.
Camilo, any final thoughts?
I don't think I conveyed a pretty important message. And I was mentioning a lot about staying in communication with your landlord and really with every party in every situation where your rights are at risk. Try and keep everything to writing. And I mean that in every way possible. If you can communicate with your landlord through email, it's preferable. If you can do it through text, not as good, but preferable. Let's say you manage to work out a payment plan. Let's say you manage to work out some sort of modification to your lease agreement. Get it in writing. Please get it in writing. It just makes everyone's life so much easier. And then you have ground to stand on. I mean, you could have a conversation with someone on the phone and there might just be a genuine miscommunication. Both sides might be on a different page. Get things in writing.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the confirming email. So, let's say your landlord is just absentee landlord and you guys agree. So I actually had the situation happen where the landlord agreed to take like half rent for 2 months. And then I was like, send a confirming email, you know, per our conversation of May 28th. This is what I understand. Please respond within 48 hours if this is not the case. So that can help protect you too. Obviously, even just some scritches on to use the fabled way on a cocktail napkin, you know, from a contract that made it at a bar. Not that we have bars that you can go to right now, you know, where you guys write things down and both sign it is preferable, but anything that can show that you guys made some sort of agreement is good. I still don't see any questions coming in, so I want to thank Camilo for joining us today. Remind everybody that we have another presentation coming up with the Legal Aid Society at the Orange County Bar Association next Thursday. That will be on scams, so common scams that we see, what's out there right now. Any sort of time there's something, there tends to be new scams that pop up. So we're definitely seeing those currently. If you're watching, if you'd subscribe to our channel, it's our brand new YouTube channel, that would help us out a lot. YouTube prevents you from doing certain things until you have a number of subscribers. So we'd love it if you'd subscribe. Now I feel like a YouTube personality. You know, all of our contact information is below. I believe Camilo also had some resources that he wants to share. So I'm going to get those from him and I'll either edit the description below or maybe try to do a pinned comment. I'm new to YouTube, so I'm going to try, but we'll somehow get those below so that you guys can see those as far as like where you can find out the norent.org that he mentioned earlier and some of that other stuff. And hopefully we'll see some of you guys back here next week. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.